Hello everybody, hopefully you can see me and you can hear me. What I'm going to do is, if you can see and hear me, if you can give this video a like or comment, just so that I know you're listening and I know that you are there and that there is somebody at the end. Apologies, if you are watching this on replay, give us a hashtag replay as well. So that should be what we need to talk about. I'm just going to wait a couple of moments and just make sure that people can see and hear. Otherwise, I will not necessarily know that I am there. Perfect. Okay. So hopefully, I know that there won't be all that many of you necessarily looking at this live because we've got a big event today, but hopefully this will be useful to people who are watching this afterwards or indeed on replay, and do just let me know that that is something that you are doing. Perfect. Okay. Brilliant. All right then, so I think we will start, and it's kind of with great pride that I'm starting off these bite-sized learning chunks, our bite-sized Facebook Lives, and the first one that we're going to be doing is on verbal reasoning. So for any of you who don't know who I am, confused to see my face pop up in the group, my name is Gemma Zoe Smith. I am an education expert. I run a tuition agency, an education consultancy, and I'm also often on this group talking to parents about where to apply, what schools to apply, and also how to get through the 11+ exams. So my focus is really on top selective school entrance. And one of the big things that we deal with when we deal with 11+ and selective schools is verbal reasoning. And verbal reasoning typically has 3 different issues. Timing. It is incredibly time tight. Lots and lots of questions, short amount of time, and therefore you're going through at the rate of under a question per minute. Silly mistakes. They kind of come hand in hand, but when you're rushing, that's something that you're going to be doing. You're going to be making silly mistakes. And thirdly, not answering a whole section. So that might be that your child is struggling and therefore missing it out, or that they're doing it and therefore losing a lot of time and not necessarily finishing. So the first 10 minutes of this talk is really going to be on exam technique. And then the last 10 to 15, 20 minutes will be about specifics for verbal reasoning. So if I've got any students who are watching, the last 20 minutes are probably a bit more appropriate, but likewise, I'd like you to have a listen to the exam technique, because the exam technique is really quite useful in terms of working out where you are. First 10 minutes is also quite useful for parents. So I thought about, what do we do? Steps for summer. Summer's coming up. And in terms of verbal reasoning, you've got a lot of different types of questions, about 21 to 26, dependent on whether you're taking different exams, what regions you're in, what types of board you're sitting, whether you're looking at VR and you're taking an exam that involves closed questions, or all sorts of different. But you're looking at probably quite a lot of different exam types. So what would be useful is to look through the types of exam question that you get, and to go through and mark each one in green, because you are usually quick and accurate with it. Yellow for mostly quick and accurate. So there's some points where if you're a student where you are struggling to keep to the time, if you're a parent, you can see that your child is struggling to keep to time, and red for those that are not quick or accurate. And that really helps to break down the verbal reasoning into chunks. And you'll see I chunk it in a different way at the end, but this is one of the ways in which to chunk it. So that can be done by looking at old verbal reasoning papers. There is also a list of 21 different types of VR question for GL exams. I can put a link down in the comments for it, and that will help necessarily if you're doing GL. But really worth going through and actually noticing where is it that you're typically getting stuck. Because first of all, that's losing marks, but second of all, it's losing time. And timing is a really big thing for verbal reasoning. Ultimately, every verbal reasoning question is worth the same amount of marks. So if you're spending too long on a question, say you're spending 2-3 minutes on one question worth 1 mark, you could have gained 3 marks in a different area. So that's why it's got to be quick and accurate. And if one of those is missing, that's where it has to go down into the yellow or indeed the red. So once you've gone through those, the kind of plan of action for summer, which the ones that I would speak to my students about, would be for green, practice. It's actually quite fun when you really know what you're doing with it. Kind of quick practices, get everyone in the family doing it. That is the stuff that you are ace at. You really know what you're doing, kind of show off a little bit. So make sure that you're doing it every week, but that it's practicing and that it's repetitive practice, but it's fun practice. Yellow is probably going to be the area that you gain the most marks on. This is where it's worth revisiting, spending a bit longer going through techniques of how to do a question, and indeed techniques on how to speed up, which is what I'm going to be speaking about a little bit at the end. Time them until you've got a question per minute, ideally 1 question per 30 seconds. I know it is hard, but that timing is important because, as we said, if you're spending too long on it, then you're letting other marks slip by. And then learn the trip ups. So when I speak to students, there's certain questions, type number 7 in GL, which is letters for numbers, which is where they say A equals 5, B equals 7, C equals this. Make sure you're marking the right letter, not necessarily the right number. Often people will work out the number and then not necessarily look back and look at the letters and might end up marking the wrong letter. So that's a trip up. It's where someone would typically go wrong. Make sure you know what's happening with those trip ups. Something that I'm going to be talking about for each of the categories of questions a little bit later. But these are the ones, the yellows, maybe you're going to speed them up, maybe you're going to get them more accurate, but ultimately this is what's going to be pushing from the current mark that you're at to a higher mark, those yellows. So as you've been through, as you've been marking down, okay, this one is maybe a yellow one you're not quite getting all of the time. It's not a green, it's not easy, it's not fun, but let's work on that and really push it. The red is something that's going to be hard, and I'm aware that it becomes quite controversial, and so I've kind of marked it as a bit of a controversial point. I would focus, if you're really struggling, those reds are where you should be really struggling, looking at 1 to 2 red areas and scoring 50% on them. So making sure, if you're a parent, that you know where the red questions are, your child knows where the red questions are, means that then they're aware of where their weaker areas are. If they can go through a paper and go, right, these 5 questions, these are the ones that I'm going to really struggle with, then they're aware as they're going through the paper, okay, these five are the ones that are going to either take too long or I'm not going to score as high on. Maybe I will look at the first 3 and I'll really put some time into that, but I need to be really aware I've got to move on after 5 minutes. So controversial, but when it gets to this point, if I have a student who is really struggling, they've got 1 or 2 red areas, and typically those red areas come up each time, we would look at maybe scoring 3 out of 5 and maybe spending a little bit more time to score 3 out of 5 and skipping the other 2, because ultimately otherwise you're going to end up using too much time, and that means that you're going to end up losing marks later on. Ideally we get to the end of summer and there are no red areas. That would be the ideal. So they've only been in green and they've only been in yellow. But if you are struggling and you do have 1 or 2 red areas, think about the playoff. So if you're talking about spending 5 minutes on a question, you've just lost 5 marks elsewhere. So skipping that one question, whilst it's not a nice thing to do, It's not something that in an ideal world we would do. If it allows you to move on and it allows you to get on with the next question, that would be something at the end of summer to start looking at. Okay, so as I said, it's controversial. It's not something that everybody does. Ideally, we would be aiming for those yellows and greens all across the paper. Okay, so the second part, as I said, is going to be all about these different types of questions. So I talked previously about looking at these green, red, yellow areas. Anything from 21 to 26 different types. You can have much less, depends on the region and the exam that you're taking it in. But another way to classify them is to look at them in terms of what skills they're looking for. So the first type of skill is codes. Then you've got the idea of making words, word meanings, math, and then a logic. And these would be different categories. Typically, if you're struggling in maybe one area of code, you might not struggle with another one. But likewise, it's somewhere where you're likely to spend more time. So what I thought I would do is on the remainder of this talk, just to spend a little bit of time going over these specific questions and going over maybe where the trip ups are, where the times are, and how you might look to speed it up a little bit or indeed alter technique. So I'm hoping everybody can see this. It's a little bit smaller on the screen than it is on the screen in front of me. But the first type of code question that I've popped down there is a sequence code. So typically this will have the A to Z at the top, and then they'll ask you to fill in the next one. So we have here A, T, B, S, C, R, D, Q, E, P. And you are looking at the relationship between those letters. So different things should come to your head. It's kind of like a little tick list. So I would look at, first of all, does the first one in the first pair relate to the first one in the second pair? So here, A, B, okay, then the next letter. So does it go A, B, C, D, E? Yes, it does. Therefore, I can fill in my first letter in the remaining pair. The second thing I'd be looking for is, do those pairs themselves have a relationship between them? So does A and T have a relationship, maybe a spacing between it? As we go from A to T to B to S, are we keeping that spacing? Or is it something where only the first letter corresponds with the first letter, corresponds with the first letter, corresponds with the first letter? Now, the type of trip up that ends up happening in this type of code question is often to do with that alphabet at the top. If you've got a student who has been through codes, they know what they're doing with this type of question, they will often be drawing on the alphabet. And I love drawing on the alphabet because it really helps you to be able to work out where you are. But it has a problem when you reach maybe the third or the fourth of those questions. So say we've been taking our pencil and between A and B, there's been like a leap, and then B and C, leap, D, E, F. So that has got F. And we've drawn a little circle around F. And in this regard, we're going from T to S to R to Q to P. We're going and we're drawing round the O. Now, when you come to use that alphabet again, now it's got drawing all over it. And this is where students typically will go over it again, go over it in pencil again or in pen again, and you end up with a really mucky alphabet. And that can often end up causing silly mistakes. So one way to be aware of that is simply being aware of how clear you need to keep your alphabet. So if it gets unreadable, find another alphabet. If there's another one in the paper, use that one. Draw it out again. If your child or if you're watching this as a student yourself, if you know that you are good at these questions, then maybe using the rubber end of your pencil as opposed to the pencil end of your pencil is going to stop it from getting all written on. So at the end of the questions, when you're doing the fifth version of this, you don't have to try and work out whether the leap that you're making with your pencil is this one, or is it the one that you did 2 questions before? Is there pencil all over your alphabet? So that would be one of my tips on one of those codes questions. The other ones that I've got down here is a similar type of one for the second one. Often we do the same thing. There's an alphabet at the top, and you go, okay, L is related to J. Then if S is related to U, and you find out the pattern X, again, it's got the same pencil marks all over it. It might lead to it being crowded. It might lead to it being written all over, and you might not be able to make out what the code is saying. Likewise for these, just as a tip, you're typically looking for, if you've got repeat letters, for example, we have here MM, then you should end up with a repeat letter when you're ending up with your actual word, and often they should have actual words. So if you've got a G followed by a D, you might want to look again. This last one is one that a lot of students of mine get stuck on. It's the numbers to letters codes, and often you're not shown just 3, you're shown 4, and you have to work out where it is, and it tends to take a long time for some students. So the things that I look for is repetition, starts and ends. So if I scan those words, I can see that there are no letters that repeat. If I was seeing a repetition, I'd be looking for a repetition in the number. But I can see that I've got 2 that start with S, and I've got a W and an R. And if I look down at the numbers, I've got 2 that start with 1. So therefore, I've immediately worked out what S is, starts and ends. So I know that because 2 of the words start with S and 2 of the words in 2 of the numbers start with 1, I've got slow and sail. Those are the words that I've definitely got. Then if I look at ends, so the end of slow is W, the end of sail is E, well, the start of west is W. So if I look at my numbers, both of the ones that start with a number 1, end with, well, there's ended with an 8 and ends with a 2. Well, one of the other codes starts with an 8. So slow ends with a W, west starts with a W. The number 1368 ends with an 8. West, which is W, must start with an 8. And therefore, I have not just identified S and W, I also now know slow, all the letters in it, west, all the letters in it, and sail, all the letters in it. But I'd want to check. So at that point, I would look for, is there a letter that is in 2 of them? And can I see that the corresponding number is in 2? So I scan through. At the moment, I've gotten rid of rent, so I put a cross through rent. And if I'm scanning through, I can see that L is in both of the ones that should begin with a 1. And sure enough, my L, which is a 3, is the second place in the one that I think is slow, and the third place in the one that I think is sail. And that's the same for the L's. So starts and ends repeats. I wouldn't be trying to work out every individual letter until I've worked out the words. Then, once I've got the words, I'd write them on top of each other so that I can see. So if you write slow on top and then 1, 3, 6, 8, I can see that W is equal to 8, but O is equal to 6. And I'd be able to use that for my codes. Next one we've got is making words. And for these, it's a very different skill set. It is being very, very open, and that can be really hard if you've got a word that's stuck in your head. This is where I recommend, if you have a word stuck in your head, I would go on with the next one, come back to it, because if that word is always there, so say we've got the first one here, COLRAMBELOLL, and let's say we have bell stuck in your head. So bell, lol, ram, col. That's something that's really hard to get out and to find a different letter. So that would be where I'd move on, come back. The other thing that I would be doing as I look at those words is I'd be taking them individually. So lol sounds kind of right, bell sounds kind of right, ram does not sound right. So instead of trying to think of them as pairs, I know lots of people do think of them as pairs, That would be how I would try and get myself out of the rut of thinking of only one letter. Then we've got the one where you put your fingers together and you go and scan along. This is typically a time suck. So again, with the making words, this is something that I sometimes struggle to find them, and it takes me maybe a little bit longer. So the way that I'll do it is I'll put my thumbs straight on the words, keep them a gap of 4 across, and in my head say every single word. So I've got thed, hedder, edog, dogwa, ogwa, gwoz, gwasaf, asfra, sifri, and I would go along that line. Now, that takes a little bit of time, and sometimes you get all the way to the end and you haven't got it, and that would be where that timing comes in. If you've spent a minute going down that sentence, you have not got the words, then you need to consider whether it's worth spending that time doing it again. One alternative would be to go backwards. So instead of going the same way, where you're going to make the same words, try going backwards. So at this point, it would be enoi, heno, then. So by going backwards, you may see it slightly quicker than if you were to go forwards through the sentence again. So as a check, go forwards and then go backwards along that sentence. And then this last one is something that doesn't necessarily appear in every exam or every region. It's the one where you move a letter. And if you move a letter, you make 2 new words. Again, it takes a little bit of time. So again, this would be something that if I was going through it, I might be looking at seeing how long it takes me. If it takes me longer than a minute, I might miss it out because I know that that's going to cost me marks later on. Something I need to be aware of. So again, with that thumb technique, I will block out a letter on the first word. So I get econ, bacon, beckon, beown, bacon, becco. Now, the word that I recognise there is bacon, but if I did not, again, I could go backwards. So I could try it the other way. So becco, beckon, beon, beckon, bacon, econ. So say you've got the E, but you don't know where to put it. That again would be a substitute in every single letter to make sure that you've got it. So event, vint, vint, venet, vente. So again, being very methodical with these and also making sure that you've sounded every single word out, but being aware that that takes time. Then we've got word meaning. Word meaning is one of the ones that often people find easier, but tend to make sillier mistakes on. And it's usually due to that middle one. The first one's usually fine. So that would either be odd one out or odd 2 out, or it could be the ones that are the most similar. Those ones we often get. And those often depend on vocabulary. So that's why reading, vocab, going through those complex word lists, doing flashcards on words, wow words, all of those things are really worth doing, because these for vocab, if you come across the word trilby and you don't know it's a type of hat, you're going to struggle to find out if it's the odd one out. The second one is the one that people typically find a little bit tricky, and that's because it often has several possible answers. So start is to something as end is to something. And a nice little way that I like to teach when I tutor is to make sure that I use those words in a sentence. So I like to start my day with a glass of orange juice. I like to begin my day with a glass of orange juice. That fits. I could say end though. Start is to end. That would make sense. But end doesn't have a beginning. So that one doesn't work. Start today, so I like to start today. Well, I would also end today. So I'm trying to see the relationship by using it in a sentence. So start is to begin, end. Now, end could be to finish, but end could be another word. And if I wasn't quite sure, again, I could try it out in a sentence. So try putting those words into sentences. Often you'll find that there'll be two options, but only one of them will be a direct replacement. It's like a full synonym, as opposed to one that's kind of a half synonym. It might fit in certain situations, but it doesn't fit always. So that would be my tip for the word meanings. The last one is the one where it needs to match both. And again, this can be quite useful to put in a sentence. So I looked at the telescope and I saw a planet. I saw the globe. So I saw the brown, I saw the ground, I saw Pluto. Pluto might work. I saw the circle, I saw the earth. So Pluto or earth might fit there. I like to dig in the soil. I like to dig the mud. Or in my garden there is soil. In my garden there is mud. In my garden there is Pluto. Doesn't quite make as much sense as in my garden there is earth. So again, by using it in a sentence and by trying to think about those sentences a little bit broader, kind of zooming out a little bit, that's how those word meanings can help. Math ones. We've mentioned the first one, which is being aware of the fact that it's written as a letter. So if you are working this out, don't go to all the hassle of having worked out your number and then look back and misread it. And often, because they're written in this way, where it's A equals 5, B equals 14, you might read 5B and think that B is 5. So with this, what I recommend my students to do is put a line between. So A equals 5, line. B equals 14, line. C equals 12, line. Because then it's a lot harder to mix up those numbers and letters. So when you're looking back, you've got the answer 14, you see the number 14, you're not looking at the letter to the right of it, and you're not accidentally putting down C instead of B, because that is a typical kind of silly mistake. And then we've got the number relationships. And again, not necessarily every type of exam has these, but these are where you look at, is there a relationship between them? So I am looking at 4 and 6 and I'm thinking, okay, is it between them? Is it them added together? Is it them taken away? I'm trying all of the options. And if you struggle with these ones, have a list of options that you're aware of. So look back with parents and work out in previous ones what has happened. So in this case, they're added together, but previously maybe one of them was squared and added to the next one. So you've got options so that you know when you see these maths questions, you look at them and you go, are they added together? Are they taken away? Is one of them squared? Is it this? Is it this? So you've got those options to be able to work out whether your answers are going to fit into that. So typically, again, those maths ones, that tends to be a little bit of a tip. And then the last ones are logics, and they're my favorite, actually. I love logic questions, but they take a bit of time. So again, when we talked about the idea that, you know, if you're spending 5 minutes, then your 1 mark here is going to be cancelled out by the fact you're not going to finish the paper. Those logic ones, they do take time. So again, it's about quick and accurate. If you are managing them, but you're spending too long on them, then consider whether your time is better spent finishing the paper. But if you are finding that actually you're finishing the paper, most of all of the others are on green, as we talked about before, green, yellow, red, and actually this is your yellow, then definitely put some time into it, because they're very useful. Now, they're not written to help you. They're written so that you can rewrite them out in a table. So if you look along all of these, we tend to find that we've got Mr. Brown, Mr. Yellow, Mr. Red, B-Y-R. No point writing out the whole names, it's not important. And with these, I'd write them and I draw them out as well. So I've got B-Y-R, and over that, I've got 7:30. It takes Mr. Yellow 45 minutes to get to work. Okay, so I would draw Y, little line, 45 minutes. Maybe I'd work out 7:30 plus 45 minutes, the time that he gets to work. He's 15 minutes longer than Mr. Red, so I know that Mr. Red, from the R letter, I'm going to be writing 30, because that's 45 minus the 15. Mr. Brown takes 10 minutes longer than Mr. Red. Okay, so now I'm looking at the B line and I'm drawing it out as well. Once you've drawn that little table or diagram, then start to look at the statements. Then you can very easily get rid of them. Elimination is your friend in logic. So when you start to look at these, first of all, draw it out in a diagram. It doesn't have to be a pretty diagram. It doesn't have to be a pretty table, but it just has to be a way that isn't this long sentence, because it's harder to read as a long sentence. So jot down those letters, B, Y, R, and we've got 7:30, and then we've got lines that show how long it took. So yellow was 45 minutes, Mr. Red was 30 minutes, Mr. Brown took 40 minutes, and then you can start to look at the sentences and you can start to go round and eliminate, get rid of those logic questions. So those are the other ways of categorizing. So right at the start, we talked about your categories, so the green, the yellow, the red, the things that you struggle with, the things that you want to work on that you think are maybe mostly quick and accurate, you always quick and accurate, not quick or accurate, going through those, but then also being aware of the different categories of question that we get. Codes, making words, word meaning, math, logic. You might call them something different. Your tutors might call them something different. I tend to call word meaning a little bit different for my students, but ultimately they're the same types of categories. So once you've gone through those categories, once you've looked at those techniques, looked at ways to speed them up, that's the point in which you would try another paper and see, okay, have my yellows actually become greens? Has my red moved up to a yellow? So that's where we'd want to work on, making sure that you are quicker, making sure that you are more accurate to be able to boost your marks. Okay, perfect. So this was our bite-sized Facebook Live. Hopefully you have enjoyed it. If you are joining us and you're joining us on replay, then just let us know that you are joining us on replay. And if you've got any questions, then do just pop those down in the comments for me. I'll be able to get back to them and answer any questions that you have. Hopefully it's been useful, and we'll be doing bite-sized Facebook Lives really regularly over summer. And I think the next one should be next week, as far as I know. So thanks very much for tuning in. Bye bye.